Welcome to the Paladin Archives. My name is Cren, and I'm a Mason with the Paladin Order, here to take you on a journey through monsters, witches, vampires, and more in this series we're calling Monster Menagerie. I'm so excited to finally get this series started, and I'm so very glad you decided to join me today. Before we get started, I just want to take a minute to let you know that if you like what we do at the Paladin Archives, please check out the debut novel by writer Matthias Tautimus about our exploits. Aptly named The Paladin, it details the story of a young man named Jonathan who faces demons, joins the Order, and has some awkward conversations with girls because, hey, who hasn't been there? With that out of the way, let me take a moment to explain what it is we're doing here. You see, my job as a Mason in the Paladin Order is something like a desk worker for a group of monster hunters. I observe, assess, and catalog threats so that the brave men and women who actually go out into the field know what to do. Well, I was joking around with Maddie one day, and we got to assessing fictional monsters for fun, and one thing led to another, and boom, here I am. My supervisor said I needed a hobby, so yeah. Each season, we're taking a type of monster or other creature and assessing several examples of them throughout fiction. This season is the OG monster themselves, the vampire. And who better to start with than the OG vampire himself, Count Dracula from the 1931 movie, Dracula. We're going to detail his origin, personality, abilities, and physiology. Then I'll give my assessment by assigning him a paladin threat level, noting possible containment strategies, and issuing my final recommendations to any paladins that might come across him in the field. Here's the catch though. For this and all other episodes, we're only taking what we can observe from the specific source material the character's from. So any knowledge we have about Dracula that doesn't come from the 1931 movie, gone. Verboten. There are so many iterations of Dracula that it'd be insane to try to assume an official canon for him. So no other movies, no books, no plays, nothing but the exact movie we're looking at. It may shock you what he actually can and can't do. At the end of the year, we're going to take all of our vampires and stack them against each other in a ranking pool where we decide which ones most exemplify what it means to be a vampire. That's where we'll need your input, because we're going to put up polls as we reach the end of the season, so you can tell us who you think is the best vampire. That was a long explanation, but I think we're ready to go. Are you ready? I'm ready. I'm feeling it. Let's do this thing. Count Dracula, resident of Transylvania and owner of Castle Dracula, married 3 times, at once, and not particularly concerned with keeping his place tidy. Now, the movie doesn't actually go deep into his background. We know the people of the village Renfield stops in are afraid of him. There's insinuations that he's been a terrifying force in their folklore for generations, but nothing concrete. We know that he's interested in leasing Carfax Abbey in England, and that he's already chartered a boat for that purpose, and that's about it. It's really not much. Now, we can certainly chalk the lack of information up to the movie-making practices of the time, but this is actually not a terrible thing. You see, in my job, I often don't have access to lore or backgrounds for creatures we encounter. I have to make my assessment purely in observations. Well, that's what I'm going to have to do for this guy. It just seems kind of funny. Dracula is this figure that everyone knows about, but when you look at this film, they really don't say very much about him. Well, no sense in lingering here. The children of the night beckon. We must press forward. Blow! Personality can be very important for a paladin assessment. Knowing a subject's temperament, their motivations and interests, it can really help with making sure encounters with them are non-violent, or at least as smooth as we can get it. For Count Dracula, class is the word I have to go with. There's an air of civility, of propriety about his movements. Now, this is a thin, easily disrupted veneer. We See him break character when Renfield bleeds early on, his hunger clearly on display. There's a couple of other times, like his argument with Van Helsing, where he also drops the gentlemanly display, but he quickly tries to recover. It's pretty clear his motivations are all focused on snacking on people. This guy eats a lot of people. He snacks on Renfield, he eats the entire crew of the Vesta, walks 4 feet from there and snacks on a flower girl, turns Lucy into the Lady in White. It's all he seems to think about. Dracula, my man, the first step is admitting you have a problem. Yes, the meat and potatoes of any creature list. Now, I want to stress that we're only going off what we can observe from this specific film. That said, Dracula's list of powers isn't anything to sneeze at. First, of course, we have animal transformation. Specifically, we see him appear as a bat in several scenes. Now, I say appear and not transform because this was filmed in 1931. Heck, all his scenes as wolves were pretty much summed up by characters pointing off screen and saying, "Hey, look at that, a wolf. That's pretty crazy."
What's that? Running across the lawn. Looks like a huge dog.
Both Mina and Renfield also hint that he can appear as a mist, but their accounts of it are a little, foggy. Anyway, they refer to him appearing in a mist or from a mist, which could suggest either that he transformed into mist or that he simply summoned it to cover his movements. Because of an early scene in his castle where he seems to walk through a spiderweb without disturbing it, I'm going to go ahead and give him the benefit of the doubt and say he can turn into mist. This one is minor, but he might have a mild form of telekinesis. We see doors in the castle open for him without being touched. It doesn't come up in any other forms like grabbing items or levitating objects, but it is something I'd want to note as a precaution. One of the powers we actually get to see demonstrated is a sort of mesmerism. He stares at his victim and they become subject to his will. We see him do this to a few servants throughout the movie, but when he tries it with Professor Van Helsing, he fails.
Your will is strong, Van Helsing.
Good to note when making my recommendations. He also appears to be able to communicate silently with his thralls, or perhaps telepathically. We see Renfield having one half of a conversation with Dracula, pleading for him not to force him to harm Lucy. Later he does this again by howling as a wolf and squeaking to Mina as a bat.
There's that bat again.
Yes?
Look out, you'll get in your hair.
Yes?
The biggest headache I had in this entire film, though, was attempting to calculate Dracula's strength. We don't see much from him in the strength department, no lifting cars or throwing boulders. But at the 3/4 mark of the film, we hear from a sanitarium worker that Renfield
Twisted and broken them iron bars as if they was cheese.
Van Helsing immediately attributes this not to the raving lunatic Renfield, but to his master Dracula. Now, the yield strength of iron is 7,250 psi, meaning that's what you'd need to apply to break it. If it sounds like I'm about to do a bunch of math for you, you're dead wrong. That's what the internet is for. A big shout out to Versus Battle Wiki and specifically user M3X. They looked at a scene from the anime JoJo's Bizarre Adventures where Star Platinum ripped apart prison bars. Exactly what I'm looking for. Following M3X's math and substituting back in the yield strength for iron, 350 megapascals, the formula works out to 2.483, the approximate cross-sectional area of the bars, times 3.569, the tons per centimeter squared required to break iron, and we get a force of 8.861827 tons. Dracula can lift approximately 9 tons without breaking a sweat. Dracula can lift an African bush elephant. My math might be off, so please let me know down in the comments if you think I got something wrong, but assuming that was right, Dracula is a freaking beast. That's definitely going to bump up his threat score. Dracula appears almost indistinguishable from normal humans. We don't see any signs of pointed ears, hinged jaws, or anything that would give him away visually. Now, I'm not able to speculate on any difference in his internal structure, but we can speculate on his needs. He feeds on several people throughout the movie in what appears to be a very short time frame. The entire crew of the Vesta, for one. We hear from Van Helsing that
It must have blood, or he died.
this all seems to support the idea that Dracula is going to be spending the greater portion of his nights chowing down on people. That constant need for new blood, seemingly every day, will be a major point of consideration in the Paladin response. I'm hesitant to bring up his transformations into wolves and bats since we see so little of them. It seems like I'd just be talking about any normal wolf or bat, but Van Helsing does specifically say that shooting Dracula in his bat form won't hurt him.
What is it? Who is it, Martin?
It's that big gray bat again.
No use of wasting your bullets, Martin. They cannot harm that bat.
We see he recoils from crosses and is repelled by wolfsbane. Fun fact, paladins actually do utilize wolfsbane, but not for vampires. Anyway, he also doesn't appear in mirrors, a classic vampire trope. Bonus fun fact, the reason vampires classically didn't have reflection in mirrors is because they were backed with silver. Theoretically, modern mirrors would show vampires just fine. Professor Van Helsing informs us of a few notable traits that will come in handy. First off, Dracula must return to his coffin, surrounded by earth from his homeland. He also quite clearly demonstrates that driving a stake into Dracula's heart ends this story really fast. The biggest thing I took away from that scene, however, wasn't how effective the staking was, but how easy it was. It appears that when Dracula settles down for his nap, he literally becomes a corpse. Van Helsing is able to poke around in his coffin, tear off the lid, smash it into pieces to make a stake, wait around while John finds him a rock to use as a hammer, and then just casually sets his stake in place and pounds that sucker in. Now, I'm not here to critique the movie itself, but that was kind of anticlimactic. And it's really going to drop down the Paladin threat level, too. So a big part of my job is taking all the data I can collect on potential threats and calculating a threat level for paladins in the field. This is a number between 1 and 10 they use as a quick reference for what kind of trouble they should expect. Something harmless like, say, a cranky kobold probably ends up with a 1. 10s are reserved for legit world-ending calamities, so we don't hand those out casually. Think a meteor is hurtling toward Earth. I guess that wouldn't be a paladin threat. A demon meteor, a vampire meteor. You get the idea. Now, Dracula's strength is something to behold. If he manages to get his hand on a paladin, he could literally tear him limb from limb. The problem is, we don't see him do anything like that in the film. He resorts to everything else before physical violence and flees at exposure to a simple crucifix. Add to that the whole dead-by-day coffin issue, and really, I'm struggling to find a reason to rank him higher than 1. I suppose if met in the field during the night, without preparation, there's some opportunity for serious injury or even death. But with a modicum of preparation, Dracula is easily defeated. But he's Dracula, so I'll be kind and I'll bump him up to Paladin threat level 2. I'm going to be honest, this one is almost embarrassing. Strategy, find his coffin and wait. His victims don't turn immediately, so you have a little time. Wait until day and then, end him rightly? Obviously, kitted yourself out with some wolfsbane and crucifixes seems like a good strategy, but the way he just literally becomes a corpse during the day, it trumps everything. I want to suggest proper ammunition, blessed artifacts, or even just some armor to counter him, but frankly, I don't think any of that's needed. Just patience and knowledge of his home address, which he seems more than keen to share.
I'm Count Dracula. I have just leased Carfax Abbey. I understand it adjoins your ground.
Count himself can be handled by a single paladin. I would recommend notifying neighboring parishes about the existence of the Count, but that's just purely for safety's sake. Backup would be limited to the paladin's personal preference. At most, I'd recommend utilizing the entire parish, 4 to 5 paladins, merely to make locating him easier. Actually dispatching him is going to be as simple as pulling up your favorite Spotify playlist and waiting. Now, depending on what civilians he's threatening, you might utilize some wolfsbane and or crucifixes to keep him at bay. If I had to suggest a specific paladin discipline to engage with him, I guess I'd lean toward the spiritualists, the paladins that handle specters and demons, as they tend to train their mental defenses more and would have a better chance of resisting any mesmerism. Top recommendation though, do not engage. Track down his coffin and wait. Once he's out for the day, stake him and take an early lunch. Well, that's my analysis of Count Dracula as portrayed in the 1931 film. Does it seem about right, or did I do the Count dirty? Let me know down in the comments section. I gotta say, I was a little underwhelmed by Dracula as portrayed by Bela Lugosi. It makes sense that since he was more or less the first big vampire in fictions, that all the ones that came after him would be trying to outdo him. They get stronger and faster and all kinds of new powers. But that's kind of why I did him first. We've got a lot of vampires to go through this season, so I hope you'll stick around to see all of them. If you're enjoying Monster Menagerie, make sure you like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit that notification bell. Remember, we're going to take all our vampire specimens this year and rank them for how well they exemplify what makes a vampire a vampire. We're definitely going to need your help for that, so stick around to the end of the season and make sure you get your vote in. And while you're at it, shoot us a message to let us know who you want to see next. Drop it down in the comments, or hit us up on Twitter at Paladin Archive, singular, no S at the end, and let us know. Well, I gotta get back to work in the archives, so until next time, keep your eyes peeled. You never know what's hiding out there. Bent and broke the iron bars like they was cheese.